Open government heroes. Brian Sonntag retired earlier this year. He was in public service for 40 years, including 20 years as Washington State's Auditor. He was nominated this year by the Washington Coalition for Open Government for the NFOIC's annual Heroes of the 50 States Award. It's an award that honors those whose long and consistent advocacy of transparency has helped protect the free flow of information vital to an informed democracy. In announcing his decision not to seek re-election, Sonntag cited his advocacy for greater citizen access to government as one of his proudest and most important career accomplishments. From reviewing that record, I think I would, and the board of the NFOIC certainly agrees. It's remarkable. For Sonntag, advocating for open government really wasn't a political strategy or an election strategy. It was a very deeply felt value, personally and professionally. He's embodied the beliefs that accountability demands that government be open, accessible, responsible, and responsive, and that when government talks to the people, it should tell the truth. From the letter of his nomination, I'll quote a little bit because I thought it was so well put together. Sonntag often told people that his commitment to open government was in his blood. It began with his father, Jack, who served as an auditor in Pierce County, Washington, for 22 years. His older brother was also in government. He was a member of the Tacoma School Board and City Council. And during the course of his career, he was in the situation where he had to make a decision whether he was going to be part of an executive session or executive sessions that he didn't believe to be legal, and he walked out. So it's inbred into the family, I think, and thank God for that. From the outset, Sonntag regarded advocacy for open government to be part of his job in auditing the functions of government agencies throughout the state of Washington. It wasn't always politically popular, and his efforts often faced resistance and criticism, especially among office holders in local governments. Despite that, he earned a reputation for being independent, bipartisan, courageous, and trustworthy. In 2001, he successfully promoted legislation to clarify and limit when executive sessions could be used for discussions for legal purposes. He also compiled a list of 460 issues involving open meetings of various agency boards between 2004 and 2007. Problems that were noted: executive sessions conducted for illegal or unallowable purposes, official actions taken in closed sessions, failing to state or document the purpose of a session, discussing pending litigation, but with an attorney not present, holding closed sessions without first holding an open session, as the law requires. These are the kinds of things that in every state and every coalition that's represented in this room, we struggle with all the time. And too few advocates for that exist in state government, I think. So that's why this is so special. In 2005, a citizens' initiative expanded the powers of the Auditor's Office to allow performance audits of government entities. Sonntag had advocated that for years. One of the first audits after the initiative passed was a check of local government's compliance and handling of public records requests. Many city and county officials accused him of a witch hunt, but he persisted and was able to fight off attempts to dilute his authority. Since 2005, his office has conducted 50 performance audits and identified $1.3 billion in recommended savings and potential revenue. And 86% of those recommendations were implemented. This is from the News Tribune in Tacoma. In 2007, he partnered up with the State Attorney General and to successfully pushed for creation of the Washington Sunshine Committee to examine exemptions of the state's Public Records Act. Back when their act was approved in 1972, there were 10 exemptions to it. And here's another kind of harsh reality that too many of us know too well. By 2007, there were more than 300. In 2009, Sonntag and the Attorney General joined forces again to advocate for the creation of an open government task force to study and make recommendations on the creation of an administrative board to rule on complaints of violations of the Public Records Act and the Open Public Meetings Act. An editorial in the News Tribune of Tacoma said on his departure, "If anyone's not sorry to see him go, it's those in state and local officials who have been stung by his office's audits or who take issue with how much more accountable and accessible he feels they should be to the public." In his last report, Sonntag explained his core belief quite simply and I think quite eloquently. Public officials just need to remember whose government it is. It's never wrong to open the doors and let people in. On behalf of the NFOIC, it's a great honor and a great privilege today to announce Brian Sonntag as the 2013 honoree and Open Government Hero of the 50 states. Please join me in congratulating him.
Ken, when do I have to be through? I'll just take a few minutes, but I can't tell you how much this means to me in particular. That quote about it's never wrong to open the doors and let people in, I actually stole that from my brother, who was first elected to the Tacoma City Council in 1971. I had some good teachers along the way who did instill the values of open government. I could tell you some pretty interesting stories about, well, I'll tell you a couple, but they're probably not uncommon. I mean, my wife Jan last night told me that I'm probably, back in my element now, just being in a room full of people who use words like accountability and transparency and open government, and she's right. I mean, since I didn't run for re-election since the middle of January, I've been looking for you guys. I mean, this is, I don't want to leave, but there is nothing if government isn't open. If people can't see what's going on in their government and touch and read and be able to participate, citizen participation in their government is what it's all about. And if those of us who have been in public office can't facilitate that, it's just continually taking steps backwards. So when I was, after 20 years in county government, when I was elected state auditor, in Washington State, it's a constitutional office. It's part of the executive branch. It's not a legislative auditor. It's very independent. The founders of our state didn't like or trust government very much, and they created this very independent office and put it right smack in the state constitution, made it a statewide elected office. Our charge was to audit the books and accounts of every unit of government in the state, all state agencies and all local governments, which they range in size from Department of Transportation and Social and Health Services, large cities and counties, transportation networks, and in Eastern Washington there are mosquito control districts. But anybody who's responsible for any public money, large or small, came under our purview. And so we thought, what a great opportunity, since we're going to be in every government agency, every department at some point. And because it's created in the Constitution, the auditor's office is not going away. If we don't audit these agencies or this city this year, well, we'll be back next year. It's not going anyplace. And so we picked up the idea that if we could help make those government agencies and those entities more open and responsive and responsible, then we're providing or helping to provide that level of public service everywhere all across the state. So my 20-year background in county government, I was audited by this office. I better put that down or I'm gonna gesture it someplace. And that, it wasn't always pleasant to be audited. Nobody likes to be audited, but that's kind of the idea. It's about accountability. It's about openness. It's about identifying for the public what's going on with their tax dollars. I mean, we're talking about public records, public meetings, public information. There's one operative word there that I think escapes people sometimes, but it's public. Who do you work for? Who does pay you? Who in the heck hired you? Well, I was hired by the voters of the state of Washington to be their auditor. What an honor that was. What a fragile sometimes public trust that is. It's easy to sometimes shatter, break, or at least tarnish that trust. But we got to evaluate the stewardship of every public official in the state to some degree. Now, we didn't look at every voucher and every transaction, but we did start off by wanting to make sure their processes were open, that they had a mechanism in place to allow citizens to participate and see what's going on, and where they didn't, we called them on it. And I was very proud of that effort. We found that we were pretty much the only audit shop in the country taking on that kind of effort as strongly and as independently as we did. It was mentioned that I never was afraid. Maybe I was never smart enough to not jump into some fights, but some were particularly fun. And one was the year I decided, don't ask me why, but I decided to tackle, well, the whole executive session thing that we talked about earlier. Well, first of all, I have one little prop. When Mike Wrights was talking this morning about getting records from the governor's office, and he couldn't pull up the one slide to show you, I have to show you what that one actually was. This is from the governor's office when they complied with the request providing information. And you can see they redacted a little bit. In fact, everything down after confidential memorandum is black. I had to. But we decided to executive request legislation, a bill that would require local governments, and there's nearly 2,300 different local governments in the state, but require them to record, at that time the language was tape record, but record, I don't care how they record it, their executive sessions. The state law in Washington says if you're going to go into executive session from your regularly scheduled existing meeting, you need to go in there for a purpose and announce how long that's going to be, and then come back and reconvene and say, okay, here we are, meeting's back going. Well, we thought we would really be able to prevent a lot of trouble, a lot of problems, if we just required local governments to record those sessions that they didn't allow anybody in. And if there were a problem, if it was ever going to be contested, it would be held, a review, an in-camera review by a sitting Superior Court judge in his or her chambers to review what the issue was. And the result would either be, no, this was a proper use of executive session and this information should not be released, or no, they should not have done this in executive session. The information is released. I see no harm either way. They were either right and that was okay, or they're wrong and release the information. Well, most local governments did not think that was a swell idea. And so I'll describe, because this was pretty typical, but there was an evening legislative hearing one night, and I got there a little bit before the hearing was supposed to start, and I was out in the hallway talking with a couple of people, and I wound up in a conversation with a guy who was the mayor of a small town near Spokane, Washington, in eastern Washington. And we had not met before, and he just decided, because he figured I was one of them, that he'd start grumbling and mumbling a little bit about this proposed bill. They want us to record executive sessions, and to do that, we'd have to, get a big, fancy, expensive recording system. And I'm thinking, this is a pretty small town to begin with. And so I asked him, I said, well, I don't know that that's the case. I said, have you ever heard of Radio Shack? And thinking, buy a little tape recorder and put it on the table. He said, well, yeah, I suppose but then we'd have to hire somebody to operate and keep this. And I said, yeah, or maybe you could just rotate the responsibility of hitting the on and off buttons. And I just didn't see how complicated that would be, but he did, and actually they won, and the bill was never passed. Then the Attorney General and I, a couple of years later, co-sponsored a bill that would have provided for an administrative review, short of a citizen or a newspaper having to take a government agency to court, to Superior Court, to determine, if they should release the information or the documents. Let's have an administrative process that would be much more timely, much less costly than hiring lawyers and going to court. That didn't pass either, because most of the government agencies would still rather throw up that roadblock and not let people have access. But that fight is going to go on forever, and I'm just so glad that there are people like you who are watching government and making sure that access exists, and to get government's attention, and to get bureaucrats at any level to realize who they work for, whose information it is, and that they ought to be providing it anyway, is an argument that we started making in Washington State. I couldn't believe it sounds so simple. And of course, when somebody as smart as he is stands up here and says that, I get a little bit confused. But all it would take is writing 50 or so pages of code. I have no idea what you're talking about. But the concept of the information should just be provided and not have to take a request each time is, I think, something even I can understand and the government ought to be doing. I could ramble for a long time and tell a few more stories, but the Sunshine Committee that was mentioned, that was formed to weed and prune out some of those exemptions that have been passed into law in Washington State. As State Auditor, I got to make one appointment to that Sunshine Committee, and Ken Bunting was my appointee to that board, and I was very proud of that, very proud that he accepted that, and he did an outstanding job. When he left, David Zeke from the News Tribune that was mentioned, David's on there representing the auditor's office now. I don't have a vote or an appointment anymore, but I'm still concerned with what they do. I'm going through some withdrawal, as you can tell. 40 years of doing what I did, and in the middle of January, just that's cut. I'm on a different page now. It's a little. I'm not too sure what I'm doing, but the ability to hang out with you folks for a few days is really helping, and my mental outlook will improve as we go along. This recognition is, I said it's special. I can't even really describe how much it means to me personally, and I know, having my wife Jan here today is very special to me too, to share in this. But if it weren't for the people who I worked with, especially in the State Auditor's office, as well as my dad and my brothers, and the good examples I had to learn from, but a couple people who I worked with in the State Auditor's office, I always figured that good investigative journalist is just one little DNA strain away from a good investigative auditor. Are there other auditors in the room? Okay, well then you'll probably all agree with me that most auditors had their personality removed at birth. And that's kind of that main difference. And I say that with nothing but love and appreciation for them, but geez. I mean, they do really good work, just they don't know how to tell anyone about it. And so one of the first things we wanted to do in office was to go tell the public that they actually had this office, that someone was there to advocate on their behalf, and we issued 1,000 or more audit reports a year, but let's make it so someone would actually read one and value it and see some good information. And then if the public reads it and cares about it, they might be able to work with their local government or state agency and affect some change. So we wanted to write them in an understandable way. If I could explain what was in our audit report to my mother, was the barometer I always used, then it was understandable. Not so much because of her, but because if I could explain it to anybody, then it was understandable. Well, we did. We even, one newspaper in the state, the Bellevue Journal-American, referred to our audit reports as, we even enjoy reading these things now. I thought that was the highest praise we could get. But the first thing I had, Jerry Pugnetti, and Jerry was with the News Tribune for a long time. His dad was the editor of the News Tribune and the founding editor of the Tri-City Herald in the state of Washington. But Jerry's first charge was to go around and work with all of our audit teams. We had teams in 14 different cities around the state, and provide some writing training, just some general guidance to get them to take their very technical, at times, audit work in looking at financial statements. And one thing this could be risky in some crowds, but with auditors it wasn't so. He tried to teach them to write how you talk. Well, unfortunately, that's also how they talk. And so we had to amend that. And then a woman, Mindy Chambers, who was with the Olympian newspaper and covered state government for a long time, she came on board with us and worked with me for about 15 years. And she was an investigative reporter, and what a great blend, because when she came on board, I said, I don't really know exactly what I want you to do or what your job description is. Just stick your nose into everything and let me know what you think. And that was the job description she was looking for, and it worked really well. She did. She was involved with each and every audit report that went out, how we communicated that. She was not a spokesperson for me. I never had one of those. If reporters, editors, other journalists, anybody wanted to know what's going on, they could call me. In fact, most reporters in the state still have my cell phone number, and that was something that worked well for me, that accessibility and establishing relationships with professionals around the state really worked well. Okay, I'll stop rambling right now. Ken, the coalition, SPJ, thank you all so much. This is a big deal to me, and I'm going to go home and have a little party and celebration with Mindy and Jerry and some of the others who they've got a piece of this as well. Thank you very much.